Fishermen found a $90 million luxury container underwater. What happened next will shock you. It was a calm morning when the
Bring
fishermen
it up
set out on
easy.
their small,
Watch the
weather-worn
swing.
boat.
We've got a lot of current
The
here.
sun had just started to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the sea was unusually still. For most of the fishermen, mornings like this were routine. They had spent years navigating these waters, knowing every current, every rock, and every wave pattern. Fishing was not just a job for them, it was a way of life passed down from generation to generation. The men were skilled and experienced, but they were also practical. They expected nothing unusual, only the daily rhythm of nets, lines, and tides. As they moved further from the shore, the air felt different. There was a light fog rolling over the water, making the horizon appear distant and hazy. One of the fishermen, a man named Amir, squinted through the mist. "Wait, what is that?" he asked, pointing toward a strange shape bobbing slightly in the water. The other men turned their heads, curious but cautious. At first, it seemed like debris, a floating log, perhaps, or an old fishing crate that had broken free from someone's net. But something about it felt off. It was too large, too solid, and its edges were too straight. Natural debris didn't look like this. The men exchanged puzzled glances, each silently questioning what it could be. Curiosity overcame caution. The fishermen had seen plenty of lost items in the water before, but this was different. They steered their boat closer, careful not to damage their motor or their nets. As they approached, the shape became clearer. It was a massive container, far bigger than anything that should have drifted into these waters by accident. Its surface was scratched and weathered, showing signs of a long journey at sea, yet it was intact, almost perfectly preserved. The container had no markings that the fishermen could recognize at first, but its size alone told them that it was something important. Amir reached over the side of the boat and touched the container with his hand. It was cold and solid, heavier than anything he had ever lifted. "This is not ordinary," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "This is something special, something valuable, I think." The others nodded, equally amazed. They had seen cargo ships, ferries, and large crates being unloaded at the port, but they had never encountered anything like this in the middle of the sea. The thought of what might be inside ran through their minds, filling them with both excitement and caution. The decision to investigate further was not easy. The container was heavy, and they did not have professional equipment for lifting or opening it, but the fishermen were determined. They had learned long ago that opportunity often appeared when least expected, and this was one of those rare moments. Using ropes and the small pulleys on their boat, they began the slow and careful process of securing the container. Every movement was precise, every pull measured, because one wrong step could capsize the boat or send the container drifting away forever. Hours passed, and the fog slowly lifted, revealing more of the coastline behind them. The fishermen were completely absorbed in their task. For them, time seemed to stretch differently when curiosity was involved. They spoke in low voices, sharing guesses about what could be inside. Some thought it might be a lost shipment from a nearby port. Others imagined valuable items like electronics or rare goods that had been swept away during a storm. The possibilities were endless, and each theory was more thrilling than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they managed to bring part of the container onto the boat, enough to get a glimpse inside. Peering through a slightly open panel, they were met with a sight that made them freeze in disbelief. Inside were neatly stacked boxes, each labeled with names of luxury brands they had only seen in magazines. There were shining vehicles, wrapped carefully as if to protect them from any damage. And there were objects that seemed priceless, rare collectibles, and items that belonged in mansions rather than a floating container in the sea. The fishermen had never imagined encountering anything like this. Their hands trembled, not from fear, but from sheer amazement. Amir took a step back, wiping his sweaty forehead. "Do you understand what this is?" he asked, barely whispering. The other men shook their heads. None of them had ever handled anything so valuable in their lives. The container was not just a box. It was a treasure chest, hidden away by fate and circumstance, waiting for someone to discover it. But with excitement came caution. They knew that such discoveries rarely remained secret for long. Someone somewhere must have noticed it was missing. There were owners, authorities, and perhaps even people willing to do anything to get it back. Despite the fear, the fishermen made a decision to document everything. They took careful notes of the container's condition, the location where they found it, and the first glimpses of the items inside. Amir suggested taking photographs, even with their basic camera, because the images could be proof if anyone questioned their discovery. They understood that honesty and careful documentation would be their shield. At the same time, they were careful not to touch anything more than necessary. They respected the container, aware that its contents were valuable and delicate. As the day progressed, news of the discovery began to spread quietly among the locals. Some neighbors had noticed the unusual activity on the boat. Whispers and rumors started circulating, but the fishermen kept the details vague, knowing that too much attention could be dangerous. Still, the excitement in their hearts could not be contained. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that would change their ordinary lives forever. The thought of what might happen next filled them with anticipation and a little anxiety. By evening, they returned to the shore, anchoring the boat carefully and ensuring that the container remained safe. The sun set slowly, casting long shadows over the water, and the fishermen sat together, exhausted but exhilarated. They discussed what to do next. Some wanted to report it immediately to the authorities. Others worried that doing so might attract the wrong kind of attention. But all agreed that this was bigger than them and that it needed to be handled carefully, responsibly, and honestly. As night fell, the fishermen could hardly sleep. Every thought returned to the container, to the luxury items inside, and to the mystery of how such wealth had ended up in their quiet waters. They wondered who the container belonged to, how it had been lost, and what dangers might be associated with it. Yet, despite all the unknowns, there was a shared sense of wonder. They had experienced a moment few people ever would in their lives, a moment where ordinary men stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. And deep down, they knew that their lives were about to change forever. The next morning, the fishermen could barely focus on their usual routine. Their minds kept returning to the container and its incredible contents. Over breakfast, Amir spoke first, his voice low but full of excitement. "We need to go back today," he said. "We need to see more carefully what is inside and make sure nothing gets lost or damaged." The others nodded, understanding that this was no ordinary find. Their curiosity had grown overnight, along with a sense of responsibility. Whatever this container was, it was more than a simple lost shipment. It was something extraordinary, something that could not be ignored. They set out early, before the sun had fully risen. The water was calmer than the day before, and the sky was a soft blue with only a few clouds drifting lazily above. As they approached the container, it looked even more mysterious in the morning light. The metal glinted slightly where the sun hit it, and the shadows around it gave it a sense of depth, as if hiding secrets beneath its surface. Amir leaned over the side of the boat again, examining the container with careful eyes. "We have no idea what we are dealing with," he muttered, "but we need to be very careful." The fishermen decided to open a larger section of the container this time. Using ropes, levers, and all the tools they had, they managed to lift one of the heavy panels. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing more of the incredible treasure inside. There were rows of gleaming vehicles, perfectly arranged and untouched by the sea. Some were luxury cars they had only ever seen in magazines or in passing on city streets. There were crates stacked neatly, some with labels of well-known fashion brands, others marked with symbols and numbers the fishermen did not understand. The smell of polished metal and new leather filled the air, and the men could hardly believe what they were seeing. One of the fishermen, a young man named Farid, stepped closer to inspect a crate. He carefully opened it and found delicate glass bottles arranged in velvet lining. "These are worth a fortune," he whispered, his eyes wide. Amir shook his head in amazement. They realized that this container was not just valuable, it was extraordinary. It was a collection of luxury items that could easily cost millions, maybe even tens of millions of dollars. They could feel their hearts racing as they tried to comprehend the scale of what they had found. As the morning passed, the fishermen explored more sections of the container. They discovered rare collectibles, such as vintage watches, gold-plated instruments, and intricately designed jewelry. There were even electronic devices that looked like prototypes, likely never seen by the public. Each item told a story, hinting at wealth, power, and careful planning. It was clear that whoever owned this container had gone to great lengths to protect its contents. The fishermen began to understand that this was not an accident. It had been deliberately hidden or transported in a way that kept it safe, yet somehow it ended up in their small fishing area. While the fishermen were amazed, they also felt a growing sense of caution. Amir reminded everyone, "We must document everything. We cannot just take these items. This is someone else's property, and there may be serious consequences if we are not careful." They agreed and began taking photos and notes, recording every detail they could see. They marked the location of the container, measured its dimensions, and noted the condition of each item. Every step they took was careful, precise, and methodical. They knew that honesty and responsibility would be essential if anyone asked about this discovery later. By midday, the fishermen realized that their small boat could not carry everything. The container was simply too heavy and too large, and moving it without proper equipment could be dangerous. They decided to leave it partially secured in the water and return to shore to gather additional help. As they sailed back, their minds were buzzing with questions. Who had lost this container? How long had it been underwater? And why was it filled with such extraordinary items? They had no answers, but they knew that the mystery was far bigger than they had first imagined. Upon returning to the village, the fishermen faced a dilemma. They wanted to share their discovery with someone who could help, but they also feared attracting the wrong kind of attention. Word travels fast in small towns, and they knew that news of a treasure could bring both opportunity and danger. After some discussion, they decided to approach a trusted local official, a man known for his honesty and careful judgment. They explained everything from the discovery to the items inside and showed the photos they had taken. The official was astonished. "You have found something incredible," he said, shaking his head. "But you must not touch anything more. We need proper authorities to handle this." The fishermen agreed, understanding that their find had quickly become a matter beyond their control. Soon, the story began to spread quietly among a few neighbors, though the fishermen made sure that only trusted people knew the details. The local official contacted higher authorities, and within hours, a team of experts arrived to secure the container. Men in uniforms and safety gear examined the site carefully, ensuring that the container remained stable and safe. The fishermen watched, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. They had discovered something extraordinary, but it was no longer theirs to handle. They realized that the world outside their small village was about to take notice. During the inspection, the authorities discovered that the container had likely been part of a high-value shipment that disappeared from a major port months earlier. There were signs of careful handling and even hints of tampering, suggesting that someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. The fishermen listened in awe as the officials discussed possibilities: insurance issues, shipping mistakes, or even illegal activities. The men had never imagined that a simple fishing trip could lead them into the middle of an international mystery. Every question raised more curiosity, and every answer seemed to create new questions. Despite the growing attention from authorities, the fishermen maintained their calm. Amir and his friends were careful not to exaggerate anything. They shared their observations honestly, describing exactly how they found the container, what they saw, and the steps they had taken to document it. The officials appreciated their honesty, noting that it was rare for ordinary people to discover something of such value and remain responsible about it. This helped the fishermen gain a sense of reassurance. They had done the right thing, even though their lives had suddenly become more complicated. As the day ended, the fishermen returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. They spoke little during the ride, each lost in thought. The container, once a mysterious object bobbing in the water, had transformed into a symbol of something far bigger than their ordinary lives. It was a glimpse into a world of wealth, secrecy, and careful planning, a world they had never imagined existing so close to their small fishing village. They knew that their discovery was only the beginning of a story that would unfold over days, weeks, or even months. And deep down, they could not wait to see what would happen next. At night, the fishermen gathered together, sitting by the shore and staring at the water where the container still floated. The sea, once familiar and routine, now felt like a place full of secrets. They spoke quietly about the items they had seen, about the mystery of the container's journey, and about the strange mix of fear and excitement that came with discovering something so valuable. They laughed nervously, realizing that their lives had changed forever, though they could not yet see how. The experience had awakened in them a sense of wonder, curiosity, and responsibility, qualities that would guide them in the days to come. The days after the discovery were unlike anything the fishermen had ever experienced. Word of the container had quietly spread beyond their village, and soon they realized that what they had found was no longer just a local mystery. Investigators, insurance agents, and even journalists had started asking questions. The fishermen felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Their ordinary lives, once filled with the predictable rhythm of the sea and daily chores, had been completely transformed by a single discovery. Every conversation, every phone call, and every visit to the shore seemed charged with new possibilities and new dangers. Amir woke early one morning as he had done for years, but today the sunrise felt different. The sky was painted in soft pastel colors, and the gentle waves lapped against the boat dock. Yet, beneath the calm, he could feel tension building. He and the other fishermen had been summoned to meet with a team of authorities who had come to inspect the container further. These were people in uniforms, carrying clipboards, cameras, and advanced equipment. They spoke formally, explaining that the container might be part of a much larger investigation. The fishermen listened carefully, realizing that they were now witnesses in a situation far bigger than themselves. The authorities worked systematically. They examined every inch of the container, taking photographs, noting serial numbers, and cataloging the items inside. The fishermen watched with fascination. Each time a crate was opened, they discovered more details about the luxurious contents. There were not just expensive vehicles and designer goods, but rare artifacts, electronics that seemed to be prototypes, and delicate objects carefully wrapped to prevent any damage. The men could hardly imagine the value of what lay before them. It was not just wealth. It was a world they had never seen, hidden beneath the waves, waiting for someone to find it. As the hours passed, Amir noticed a group of men who did not seem to belong to the official team. They were sharply dressed, moving quickly, speaking in low voices. Something about them made him uneasy. They asked questions in a polite but probing manner, taking notes and occasionally glancing toward the fishermen as if measuring their reactions. Amir shared his concerns quietly with his friends. "We need to be careful," he whispered. "These people, I don't think they are just here to observe. There is something else going on." His friends nodded, sharing his unease. They had learned quickly that wealth and mystery often attracted attention from people with hidden agendas. By midday, the investigators had uncovered documents and labels inside the container, suggesting that it had been part of a luxury shipment from an international port. According to the papers, the shipment had disappeared months earlier under unusual circumstances. Some of the crates had been marked with shipping company logos, while others carried numbers that did not match any records in the local port. The authorities speculated that the container had been deliberately hidden or perhaps lost during a high-risk transport. The fishermen listened, absorbing every detail, trying to understand the complexity of the situation. What had seemed simple at first, a mysterious floating container, was now revealed as part of a tangled story involving wealth, secrecy, and perhaps even crime. Despite the growing complexity, the fishermen remained calm and composed. They had learned that any wrong move could complicate matters. Amir suggested documenting every interaction, every observation, and every new detail. They wrote notes, took photographs, and marked the container's position carefully. Even small actions mattered, as the world outside the village was now watching. The men understood that responsibility and honesty were their strongest tools in navigating this new reality. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating in the surrounding towns. People whispered about the fishermen who had discovered a treasure beyond imagination. Some were curious and admiring, while others were skeptical or envious. News reached a few local journalists who began asking questions, hoping to uncover the story before anyone else. The fishermen, cautious as ever, shared only what was necessary. They knew that attention could be both a blessing and a threat. Too much exposure could attract people who wanted the container for themselves, while too little could mean missing the opportunity to do the right thing and be recognized for their honesty. As days turned into weeks, the fishermen noticed patterns. The container was being guarded more carefully, with security personnel stationed around the site. Officials came and went, discussing legal matters, ownership claims, and international shipping records. The fishermen realized that the situation was now an intersection of law, business, and human greed. They began to understand that what they had discovered was not just valuable in terms of money, but important in terms of responsibility. Whoever handled the container next would need to be careful, honest, and cautious. One evening, Amir sat by the shore, staring at the water where the container floated. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the waves. He reflected on the journey so far. A simple day of fishing had led to something unimaginable. Their lives had shifted from routine to extraordinary in the blink of an eye. He thought about the stories they would tell in the future, stories of a treasure discovered in the sea, of luxury items hidden underwater, and of the tension and responsibility that came with it. He realized that their experience was unique, a rare glimpse into a world they had never known. Despite the excitement, the fishermen remained grounded. They continued their daily work on the sea, fishing for their families and maintaining their boats. But every trip felt different now. They saw the water not just as a source of livelihood, but as a place full of secrets and possibilities. Every shadow beneath the surface, every unusual shape or movement, reminded them of the container and the extraordinary events surrounding it. Their perspective had shifted, blending everyday life with the thrill of discovery. During one inspection, the authorities discovered additional items that raised more questions. Some crates contained documents and personal effects that suggested a complex backstory, perhaps involving international clients and high-value transactions. The fishermen listened intently, fascinated by the unfolding mystery. They realized that the container was not just a lost shipment. It was a piece of a much larger story that spanned countries, companies, and even governments. Each new discovery deepened their curiosity and made them more cautious at the same time. As the tension grew, the fishermen began to discuss what might happen next. They speculated about potential claims from shipping companies, insurers, or even individuals who might assert ownership. Every scenario seemed possible, and the men understood that they were at the center of something far bigger than themselves. Amir reminded his friends to remain honest and careful. "We did not take this," he said. "We only found it. We must do what is right no matter what happens. That is the only way we stay safe and true to ourselves." The weeks passed, and the fishermen noticed subtle changes in their village. People talked about them differently, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Strangers began visiting, asking questions, or taking photos from a distance. The fishermen adapted, keeping their lives steady but mindful of the attention. They continued to observe the container carefully, noting every change, every visit, and every new piece of information. The responsibility weighed on them, but it also gave them a sense of purpose and importance that they had never experienced before. Finally, as part 3 of the story unfolded, it became clear that the container was more than just a collection of luxury items. It was a symbol of a complex world, one that involved wealth, secrecy, law, and human nature. The fishermen, once ordinary men with simple routines, had become witnesses to a story that extended far beyond their small village. They had learned the importance of honesty, careful observation, and patience. And while they did not yet know what the future held, they were ready for whatever challenges and surprises lay ahead, knowing that their discovery had changed their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and the fishermen grew increasingly aware that the container had brought more than just curiosity into their lives. Its presence had changed the village in subtle but unmistakable ways. Outsiders began arriving, some official-looking, others mysterious, asking questions in polite but probing tones. The fishermen could feel the tension building, a sense that their small coastal town had suddenly become part of a larger world filled with wealth, secrecy, and intrigue. Every morning as they prepared their boats, their eyes would scan the horizon, half expecting to see someone watching from a distance. The sea, once a familiar friend, now seemed to hide secrets beneath every wave. Amir and his friends continued their daily routine, but the weight of responsibility rested heavily on their shoulders. They had discovered something incredible, but it was clear that the container's story was far from over. The authorities maintained a careful watch, ensuring that nothing was removed or damaged, while the fishermen documented every visit, every inspection, and every detail about the container's condition. They had learned that every action mattered and that even the smallest mistake could have serious consequences. The men had become not just observers, but participants in a growing mystery. One morning, a team of international investigators arrived. They spoke in formal tones, explaining that the container was linked to a shipment that had vanished months earlier under unusual circumstances. According to their preliminary findings, the shipment had included luxury vehicles, rare collectibles, high-end electronics, and personal belongings of wealthy clients. There were also signs that some of the containers had been deliberately tampered with, suggesting that someone had intentionally hidden or sunk them. The fishermen listened intently, amazed at the complexity of the situation. What had seemed like a simple discovery had grown into a puzzle spanning countries, companies, and countless unknown factors. As the investigation progressed, the fishermen began to notice unusual activity around the container. Some people appeared more than once, asking questions in ways that seemed carefully calculated. The men could sense that these visitors were not entirely official. They seemed interested in details that had little to do with the formal investigation, perhaps searching for clues that might benefit them in other ways. Amir whispered to his friends, "We must be careful. There are people here with agendas we don't know about." The others agreed, understanding that their ordinary lives were now intertwined with a situation far bigger than anything they had experienced. Meanwhile, the media had caught wind of the discovery. News crews arrived, cameras in hand, hoping to capture footage of the container and the fishermen who had found it. The villagers were curious, some impressed, others wary. The fishermen remained cautious, speaking only when necessary and avoiding exaggeration. They had learned that the story, once public, could take on a life of its own. One misstep, one careless word could change everything. Amir reminded everyone, "We tell the truth, nothing more, nothing less. That is how we protect ourselves." During one inspection, the authorities opened more crates and discovered documents and personal effects that deepened the mystery. Letters, shipping records, and unusual symbols suggested connections to companies and individuals across the world. The fishermen were amazed at the complexity of the situation. It became clear that the container had not been lost by accident. Someone had carefully hidden it, possibly for reasons of secrecy, protection, or even fraud. The men realized that they were witnessing a story that involved not just wealth, but human planning, strategy, and perhaps even deception. As the days passed, tensions grew. The fishermen could feel the pressure mounting, both from the authorities and from the invisible eyes of outsiders. They were caught between curiosity and caution, between excitement and fear. Every decision mattered. Amir suggested holding private discussions among themselves to ensure that they stayed united and prepared. They reviewed their notes, photos, and observations, making sure that they had an accurate record of everything. It was clear that they could not rely solely on memory. The container's story was too complex and too valuable to be left to chance. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, while the investigators were away, Amir noticed a small group of men trying to approach the container. They were careful, moving quietly, but their presence was unmistakable. Amir quickly alerted the authorities, who arrived just in time to confront the intruders. The men were questioned and escorted away, but the incident left a lasting impression. The fishermen realized that their discovery was not just a curiosity or a puzzle. It was a magnet for people with ambitions, greed, or hidden motives. The container, floating silently in the water, had become a focal point for conflict, desire, and mystery. Following this incident, the authorities increased security, ensuring that the container remained protected. The fishermen continued their observations, careful not to interfere but eager to understand the unfolding events. They had grown more confident in handling the situation, balancing curiosity with responsibility. Amir reflected on how much they had learned in such a short time. They had discovered the importance of patience, careful observation, and honesty. Every day brought new lessons, new surprises, and new challenges. Despite the tension, there were moments of awe and wonder. The fishermen would occasionally peek into the container, seeing the gleam of luxury vehicles, the shine of polished metals, and the meticulous arrangement of crates. Each glimpse reminded them of the extraordinary nature of their find. They could not help but marvel at the thought of how such valuable items had ended up in their small coastal town, hidden beneath the waves for months or even longer. The story of the container became more than just an adventure. It became a journey into the unexpected, a lesson in patience and discovery. As Part 4 progressed, the fishermen understood that they were at the heart of a complex narrative. The container was no longer just a floating mystery. It was a story of wealth, secrecy, and human ambition. The men had moved from simple observers to responsible participants, documenting every detail and ensuring that the discovery was handled correctly. They realized that the choices they made in the coming days could influence the outcome, not just for themselves, but for the authorities, the owners, and anyone else connected to the container. At night, Amir and his friends would gather by the shore, staring at the water where the container floated. The waves sparkled under the moonlight, reflecting the sense of mystery and wonder that surrounded them. They discussed the events of the day, sharing observations, ideas, and concerns. Each conversation reinforced the importance of honesty, patience, and careful thinking. They knew that the container had changed their lives in ways they could not yet fully understand, and that the story was far from over. The fishermen also noticed subtle changes in their own lives. Villagers treated them differently, with a mix of admiration, curiosity, and respect. They received small offers of assistance, gifts, and invitations, all because of the discovery. Amir reminded his friends to stay grounded. "We must not forget who we are and where we come from," he said. "The container may be extraordinary, but we cannot let it change our values or who we are." His friends nodded, understanding that integrity was more valuable than anything inside the container. By the end of Part 4, the turning point had become clear. The container was no longer a simple object of curiosity. It had evolved into a symbol of responsibility, mystery, and opportunity. The fishermen had learned that discoveries of great value often come with great challenges. They had faced tension, curiosity, and even potential danger, but they had remained honest and careful. And as the story continued, they knew that the next chapters would bring even greater revelations, testing their courage, wisdom, and unity. The weeks that followed became some of the most intense in the fishermen's lives. What had begun as a curious discovery had now grown into a situation filled with tension, decisions, and responsibility. The container, floating quietly in the bay, had become a focal point for people from far beyond the village. Authorities visited daily, sometimes in groups, sometimes individually, each time bringing new questions, procedures, and precautions. The fishermen watched carefully, noting each detail while also trying to keep their lives as normal as possible. But they knew that life, as they had once known it, was gone forever. Amir felt the weight of responsibility more than anyone. Every time he stepped onto the boat, he felt as though eyes were upon him, even when no one was near. He had become the spokesperson for the fishermen, answering questions, documenting events, and keeping the team coordinated. Each day brought new surprises. An unexpected visitor asking questions about shipping records, a security officer requesting detailed information, or a mysterious phone call from someone claiming to know more about the container. Amir and his friends were careful to stay honest, but they were also aware that the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. One morning, as the fishermen prepared to go out to check on the container, a group of lawyers arrived. They introduced themselves politely but spoke with authority, explaining that multiple claims had been made regarding the container's contents. Some claims were from shipping companies, others from insurance agencies, and a few from private individuals who said the container belonged to them. The fishermen listened, feeling both amazed and anxious. Their discovery had sparked a complex legal situation that stretched far beyond their understanding. They realized that their honesty and careful documentation were now more important than ever. The lawyers and authorities began a careful process to identify the rightful owner of the container. This involved cross-referencing shipping records, insurance policies, and documentation found inside the crates. Each step seemed deliberate and slow, but the fishermen understood that patience was necessary. One of the officials explained, "These things take time. There are many people involved, and each claim must be verified. Your role is to ensure that the container is safe and that nothing is removed without proper authorization. The fishermen agreed, recognizing that this responsibility was now a major part of their lives. While the legal processes were underway, the fishermen also faced challenges from unexpected quarters. Outsiders began arriving in the village, curious about the story or hoping to profit from it. Some asked questions politely, others less so. The men had to remain vigilant, understanding that some people might be motivated by greed rather than honesty. Amir and his friends developed strategies to deal with visitors. They spoke only when necessary, documented every interaction, and avoided revealing more than they should. They had learned that the world outside their village could be both fascinating and dangerous. Despite the pressures, the fishermen remained committed to their daily work. Fishing, once a simple routine, now carried added meaning. Every day on the water reminded them of how extraordinary their discovery had been, and how much responsibility it carried. As they worked, they shared observations, discussed potential outcomes, and supported each other through moments of doubt. Their teamwork and trust became even more important as the situation around the container grew increasingly complex. Then came a day when the tension reached its peak. A dispute arose between two claimants who both insisted on having access to the container immediately. Lawyers, security officers, and authorities gathered at the site to mediate. The fishermen, caught in the middle, felt a surge of anxiety. They had not expected to be witnesses to such heated negotiations, and they worried that tempers might flare or that mistakes could be made. Amir reminded his friends to stay calm, saying, "We only observe. We do not interfere. Our job is to ensure the container remains safe." The men nodded, understanding the importance of restraint and careful judgment. During this tense period, the authorities uncovered additional information from the shipping records. It appeared that the container had been part of a high-value shipment that vanished months earlier, under circumstances that were unusual and suspicious. Some crates had been deliberately hidden, perhaps to protect valuable items or to prevent theft. This revelation added layers of complexity to the legal claims, and the fishermen realized that the container's story was far from simple. Each day brought new pieces of the puzzle, and each discovery created more questions than answers. Amir noticed that the fishermen themselves were changing. The ordinary men who had once spent their days fishing and repairing nets were now cautious, observant, and knowledgeable about a world they had never seen before. They had learned how to interact with authorities, how to document events, and how to protect themselves from potential risks. The experience had made them more aware, wiser, and more confident in their ability to navigate uncertainty. Yet there was also a sense of exhaustion. The constant attention, the legal complexities, and the unknown outcomes weighed heavily on them. The tension reached another peak when a group of outsiders tried to approach the container without authorization. They were intercepted by security personnel, but the incident underscored the dangers surrounding the situation. Amir and the fishermen realized that their discovery was not just a curiosity. It was a magnet for attention, some of it potentially dangerous. They became more vigilant, documenting every incident and staying alert to the movements of anyone near the site. The container, once a floating mystery, had now become a symbol of both opportunity and risk. Despite these challenges, the fishermen found moments of awe and inspiration. Each time they glimpsed the luxurious items inside the container, they were reminded of the incredible journey they had stumbled upon. The polished vehicles, carefully wrapped collectibles, and high-end electronics were not just valuable. They represented human ambition, planning, and care. The fishermen marveled at the attention to detail, imagining the journey these items had taken from distant ports to the sea where they had been lost. Each observation deepened their appreciation for the extraordinary nature of their find. As the days continued, the authorities began preparing a plan for the container's eventual resolution. Legal experts, shipping representatives, and investigators worked together to identify the rightful owner and ensure that the contents were handled responsibly. The fishermen played their part by providing accurate information, documenting inspections, and ensuring that the container remained untouched. They had learned that honesty, patience, and careful observation were their strongest tools in navigating this complex situation. Finally, after weeks of tension, inspections, and careful documentation, the fishermen began to see signs of resolution. The authorities, while still cautious, were closer to determining the rightful ownership of the container. The legal disputes were slowly being clarified, and the risk of unauthorized access had diminished. The fishermen felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. They knew that their lives would soon return to a more normal rhythm, but they also understood that the experience had changed them forever. At night, Amir and his friends would sit together by the shore, reflecting on the journey so far. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts about the challenges, surprises, and lessons they had encountered. Each conversation reinforced the importance of honesty, patience, and teamwork. They realized that the container had been more than a discovery of wealth. It had been a test of character, a lesson in responsibility, and an adventure that had brought them closer together. By the end of Part 5, the fishermen had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware of the complexities of the world around them. They had faced tension, legal challenges, and potential risks, yet they had remained honest, careful, and resilient. The container had become a symbol not only of extraordinary value, but also of integrity, patience, and courage. And as they looked toward the resolution, they knew that the final chapter would bring answers, rewards, and lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The weeks of tension, uncertainty, and constant vigilance had finally begun to show signs of resolution. The container, which had once been a mysterious floating object in the middle of the bay, was now the center of a carefully coordinated plan involving authorities, legal teams, and shipping experts. The fishermen, who had spent countless hours documenting, observing, and assisting, felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. They had played a vital role in ensuring that the discovery was handled responsibly, and now they waited to see what would happen next. Amir woke early one morning, as usual, but today there was a different feeling in the air. The sun rose softly over the horizon, casting warm light across the water, and the sea seemed calmer than it had in weeks. As he and his friends prepared their small boat, a team of officials arrived to escort them to the container. Today, they would witness the final stages of the investigation and the official handover of ownership. The fishermen felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. For months, they had been at the heart of a mystery that involved unimaginable wealth, international interests, and complex legal claims. Now, the story was reaching its climax. Upon arriving at the container, the fishermen noticed the heightened security. Barriers had been set up, and additional personnel ensured that no unauthorized person could approach. The investigators explained that after thorough examination of shipping records, insurance documents, and labels on the crates, the rightful owner had been identified. It was a previously unknown heir of a large shipping company, a person who had inherited the responsibility for high-value shipments after the sudden passing of a relative. The heir had been searching for months for the missing container, unaware that it had ended up far from any major port. The moment the heir arrived was both formal and emotional. Dressed simply yet elegantly, they approached the container with a mixture of relief and awe. They inspected the crates, the vehicles, and the carefully preserved luxury items. The heir's expression reflected the value of the discovery, not only in terms of wealth but also in terms of history, personal connections, and significance. Amir and the other fishermen stood back respectfully, aware that this moment belonged to the rightful owner, but quietly proud that they had helped make it possible. Legal formalities followed, with officials explaining how ownership would be confirmed, how the items would be cataloged, and how the container would be transported safely to its final destination. Every detail had been planned to ensure that nothing was lost, damaged, or misappropriated. The fishermen were impressed by the level of care and organization. They had gone from discovering a mysterious container in the sea to witnessing a complex operation involving international law, logistics, and diplomacy. It was far beyond anything they had ever imagined in their quiet village lives. The heir, aware of the role the fishermen had played, expressed gratitude. "Without your honesty, diligence, and care, we might never have recovered this container safely," they said. "You could have taken advantage of this situation, but you chose integrity. That is worth more than any treasure." The fishermen were humbled by these words. For them, honesty and responsibility had always mattered, but hearing it acknowledged in this extraordinary context filled them with pride and satisfaction. They realized that their courage, patience, and careful observation had not only protected the valuable items, but had also preserved their own integrity. As part of the resolution, a reward was arranged for the fishermen. While not equivalent to the immense value of the container itself, the reward was significant enough to change their lives. It allowed them to repair their boats, invest in better fishing equipment, and even secure education opportunities for their children. The fishermen accepted the reward graciously, knowing that it was recognition for their honesty, courage, and dedication. But beyond the material benefit, they carried with them an even greater reward: the knowledge that they had done the right thing in extraordinary circumstances. The container itself was carefully loaded onto a secure transport vessel, ready to be taken to a high-security warehouse for cataloging and distribution. The heir oversaw every step, ensuring that nothing was lost or damaged. The fishermen watched, fascinated, as the operation unfolded. It was a careful choreography of cranes, trucks, and safety personnel, all working together to move items of immense value without a single mistake. They had witnessed countless things in the sea, but this was unlike anything they had ever seen, a blend of wealth, logistics, and precision that left them in awe. While the container was being moved, Amir reflected on the journey. What had started as a simple morning of fishing had turned into a life-changing adventure. They had encountered curiosity, mystery, tension, and responsibility, and they had navigated it all with honesty and care. The story of the container had taught them valuable lessons about human nature, integrity, and the unpredictable ways life can change in an instant. They realized that their lives had shifted, not only in material terms, but also in perspective, understanding, and confidence. The villagers celebrated quietly, proud of the fishermen, and amazed by the story they had been part of. Local media covered the handover, emphasizing the honesty and bravery of the men who had discovered the container. The fishermen became local heroes, not for the wealth they found, but for the way they handled it. Their story inspired others, showing that integrity and responsibility could triumph even in situations involving unimaginable temptation and complexity. As the sun set over the water that evening, Amir and his friends returned to their homes. The sea looked the same, but their perspective had changed. It was no longer just a source of livelihood. It was a place where extraordinary opportunities could arise, and where courage, honesty, and patience could shape the outcome of life-changing events. They knew that the story of the container would remain with them forever, a reminder that even ordinary people can encounter extraordinary moments and handle them with dignity and care. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a new kind of normal. The fishermen continued their daily routines, but they were changed. Conversations at the shore included reflections on the container, the air, and the lessons learned. They shared their story with family, friends, and neighbors, emphasizing not the wealth they had discovered, but the importance of responsibility and integrity. The village itself felt a sense of pride, knowing that people from their community had played a role in a story that stretched far beyond the horizon. Looking back, Amir realized that the container had been more than a physical object filled with luxury items. It had been a test of character, a journey of observation, patience, and courage. The lessons they had learned would guide them for the rest of their lives. The importance of honesty, the value of teamwork, and the unexpected ways life can challenge and reward those who act with integrity. And while they had glimpsed wealth beyond imagination, they knew that the true treasure lay in their actions, choices, and the trust they had earned. The story of the container would eventually be told far and wide, inspiring others and becoming a legend in its own right. People would marvel at the discovery, at the incredible value of the items, and at the mystery of how they ended up in a small fishing village. But the fishermen would always remember the personal journey, the suspense, the tension, the responsibility, and the ultimate satisfaction of doing the right thing. They had faced extraordinary circumstances, and they had emerged with their integrity intact, their lives enriched not only by material rewards, but by the knowledge that they had acted with courage, honesty, and care. And so, as the sun set on the calm waters, the fishermen returned to their everyday lives. Yet nothing was ever quite the same. They had touched a story of wealth, mystery, and human ingenuity. They had faced temptation, tension, and uncertainty, and they had triumphed through patience, honesty, and careful judgment. The container, once a floating enigma, was gone, but its impact would remain with them forever. They knew that life could change in an instant, and that courage and integrity could turn even the most unexpected discoveries into stories worth remembering.